years of studying the literature and maybe doing some preliminary experiments in the laboratory, a chemist maybe comes up with a good idea, works on that idea for a couple of years, and then he adds a tiny little blimp of knowledge to the common knowledge of humanity. In my case, this is in-column focusing, a very specialized technique, and I'm sure the committee is going to ask more about it. We come more to that later. But let's take a look at what the world looks like according to the PhD student who's been struggling for years to add this little bit of knowledge. This is his worldview. You see the red part that you just added. Maybe you're the only one who understands it and you struggle to write about it and to present it to other people. But most importantly, you just see that black boundary. But through your efforts, you increase the size of this black boundary. And those are all the experiments that you wish you could do, all the questions that arise from the answer that you just came up with. So new knowledge always generates more questions. All right, and then to put it into context, and I urge all PhD students to look at their work in context, the global context. So one small effort, let's maybe consider all the PhD students in Amsterdam graduating this summer. Then this would be their combined contribution to the expansion of knowledge. And maybe all PhD students in all fields in the Netherlands, the picture would look something like this. And then if we add the extremely capable, the professors, the professional researchers, putting in all the effort, then the picture maybe looks like this. Yeah, this picture, this is what I was afraid of. Yeah, it kind of looks to me like, yeah, that's the coronavirus. Yeah, of course it had to sneak into this presentation. Okay, since it's here, let's just discuss it then. So we hear regarding the coronavirus that testing is important. Well, as an analytical chemist, our job is to measure molecules. So I want to tell you a little bit about the two types of tests that are now available for the coronavirus. The first one is sort of a virology test. So you get a nasal swab stuck deep in your nose. They take out the swab and they put it in a small tube with some liquid. There you try to replicate the RNA of the virus, and you make more copies and more copies of that RNA. You add in some chemicals, you make a reaction. And if the RNA from the virus was present in your nasal swab, then you get the illumination of the final sample, and you get sort of a signal that tells you that you had at least the virus present in your respiratory system. This does not necessarily mean that you're sick, just that the virus was there. And these initial tests were done in big laboratories where you need specialized equipment, you need specialized knowledge. And now the technological development within this type of coronavirus test has led to portable devices where we can swab with little expertise. People can swab other people, put the cotton swab in such a device and get a reading if the virus is present in the respiratory system. The second test that's available now is antibody test. And we know now that there are two types of antibodies that are produced once the body starts to fight the coronavirus, the infection. And that's an antibody that's produced after about 2 days, and then a different type of antibody, let's say sort of a bigger gun molecule that's produced after about 12 days of having the infection. Now, these type of tests can tell you if you have it in the early stage or in the later stage of your body reacting to the virus. But to do that test, we need a drop of blood. We need to clean up that drop of blood, sort of filter it, and add some molecules. And then we can do a type of assay where we make chemical reactions with the antibodies, with the proteins that the body produces to fight the virus. Then some more reactions happen, and we get illumination if the antibody was present. The early stage tests were very laborious and required specialized equipment, and now we arrive at a place where the tests more look like this. It's more akin to a pregnancy test, where you put a drop of blood, you put a small liquid solution in this device, and then you can see if you had the 2-day antibody or the 9 to 11-day antibody, and this can inform the healthcare professional where you are in the diseased state, and they can prescribe treatment accordingly. All right, to be able to design these tests and go from the difficult, cumbersome, laborious scientific work in the laboratories at the universities and in research companies, then we need to know a lot about these molecules that the body produces to fight the virus. And of course, you see here on the left that these antibodies, this is just a schematic. They more look like the molecule there on the right. Now, that's a very large protein. It's composed of amino acids. All the amino acids are composed of atoms. Every amino acid has about 20 atoms. Then we have 10,000 amino acids in such a protein, or 100,000 maybe. So you see that the chemical nature of the molecules that the body is producing to fight this disease, they're highly complex. And this is the field that my colleagues and I study. We study these type of complex molecules using state-of-the-art complex equipment. And these are the type of machines my colleagues and I use: nuclear magnetic resonance, high-pressure liquid chromatography, or mass spectrometry. These are the workhorses of academia and industry. These are very specialized equipment and require experts to run. So it takes a long time. You see, it's been months now that we needed to figure out how to make simple tests for the antibodies and the virus. So some smart people came up with an idea: what if we could simplify this pipeline of generating knowledge, and we could make out of these multiple instruments, we could make one. So how can we couple instruments together to simplify the generating of knowledge? And that's where in-column focusing comes in, because it's actually a coupling technique to couple instruments together. Here I'm going to show you a small video of how it works. So we get molecules in liquid coming in from one device. Then we heat up what's called a trap column. We put the molecule into the trap column while it's hot. Then we cool the trap column down, and we start to pump out from the other side. And that means that the molecule was effectively trapped due to the temperature change. And then we get a stream to, let's say, our second device analysis. All right, that was my short presentation about today's analytical situation, and a little bit of information about what we're going to be discussing in the upcoming minutes of this PhD defense. Thank you.
We have 3 minutes left, so we wait, or can we start?
I yield the remainder of my time, yes.
Okay. I'll give the sign 11:15 then. 2 minutes left. Well, the defense starts now. I'll give the floor to the rector.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the special meeting of the Doctorate Board of the University of Amsterdam in occasion of the defense of Mr. Cornelisson van der Vente. Dear candidates, to open the discussion, please read aloud the first part of the formula.
By authority of the Rector Magnificus and the Doctorate Board of this university, I shall, during this hour, in order to obtain the doctorate, publicly defend my thesis entitled Towards Ideal Modulators for LC times LC. I entreat all those who wish to voice criticism of the contents of this thesis to do so in a truthful and lucid manner, so as to provide an opportunity for an ordered exchange of views.
The first opponent of today is Professor Peters, Professor of Biotheoretical Analysis at the University of Amsterdam, and he also has an appointment at DSM Coatingsrescience. Professor Peters, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear candidates, let's start first with some congratulations with this very nice and innovative work on idle modulators. And also the finalizing of your PhD thesis. Yeah, it was a very nice book. So congratulations with that. I also would like to take the opportunity to say congratulations to your promoter, Professor Peter Schoenmakers, and your co-promoter, Professor Peter, Sjoerd van der Waal. I'm sorry. Of course, let's start with a simple question. Yes? So let's start with the first page of your book. So let's call it the title. Yeah. So my free interpretation is that you did some innovation on a new idle modulator, right?
Correct.
Okay. So I think it's very important because you call it the heart of your LC of a 2D LC system, which is fully true, I think. And so we end up at page 31, and there you put some criteria for an idle modulator. So I have a very simple question. Are you still happy with these criteria?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and your question. Indeed, there are criteria listed there. And
the answer can be very short. Are you happy with it? No.
I am happy with them, yes. But okay. They're not complete. Let's put it like that.
Oh no, I just asked yes or no. But you say yes, right?
I say yes.
Okay. So let's assume that you are my manager. Yes? Right?
All right.
I work in the lab and I develop a very nice one-dimensional LC separation for you. Yeah? On a very complex mixture. And then I put my detector rate at 2 or 3 data points per peak. Yes?
All right.
Happy. So I come to your office. Look, Henrik, candidate, we have a very nice separation I made. Are you happy with that?
If we have 2 to 3 data points per peak, that would be the first thing I would ask you to improve. Can't we improve upon that, Ron?
But you call that an idle modulator, right? So why is in 2D is 2 or 3 enough, and for 1D 2 or 3 is not enough?
Yeah. So that's a very good question. And 2 or 3, it's considered, I would say, a bare minimum. And
okay, let's put it at 4 then.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah. If we put it at 4, then I think depending on how many peaks we're talking about and in the peak capacity of the first dimension, I would think that 4 would be enough to not compromise this first dimension separation once you run a second dimension separation.
Oh, let's keep those to 1-dimensional. What happens if I put my detector rate on only 4 data points per peak? What is the result? Because I have a perfect separation. All the peaks are very, very nice separate.
peak capacity more than enough. What is that? What is the result of that?
Then you get very boxy peaks, and you lose some of your let's say the power of your separation.
Yeah,
I think
so yeah, go on.
There is a figure that touches upon this on page. I'm trying to look it up now. I think it's page 32. So just the next page over. There we show the effect of indeed the detector, let's say acquisition rate on how your first dimension separation gets compromised if you don't have enough data points per peak. So if you compare the third figure to the first figure, you see how much you lose.
Yes, but what do I lose? For example, if I want to quantify your coronavirus, what is the result of this low detector frequency?
If you want to quantify the let's say a single peak, then you would hope that one of your data points falls on the top of that peak. Statistically, it's not going to fall right at the top, so you might be underestimating the concentration that is actually present in the sample. Okay, correct. So we on the same page on that, yeah. So if I do it over 2D, do I not have the same problem then? I cannot quantify it. Why you call it an idle modulator? So I'm very interesting why you say that it's idle when I cannot quantify even a 2D separation. Yeah, so 2 to 3 cuts per peak. I'm reminded of work done by Professor Vivo, where he showed, using of course his patented complex mathematics, that 2 to 3 cuts per peak would result in, let's say, a peak capacity of the complete system that is close to the ideal peak capacity of the first dimension multiplied by the second dimension. Of course, there is some loss of this 2 to 3. Of course, ideally, you want to have a higher sampling rate, but then that comes at the cost of dilution in your system, and sensitivity, therefore. Correct, but still, because you call it an idle modulator, I really expected then that you say I need more than 10 or 12 data points per peak, or yeah. And the other thing, what I also miss is, for example, the ease of use, right? Or the application window. Or
can you say something about that?
Yeah, definitely. And that is a criticism of most modulators used in two-dimensional liquid chromatography, that they're very specific for a single application. And that is one of the advantages that we considered for in-column focusing over the traditional modulation approach, is because temperature change and how it affects retention is quite universal. So ideally, you want to modulate based on a principle that is universal, can go in any column coupling or any 2DLC separation that you wish, because from a commercial perspective, this is much more enticing. Hereby, our single system works for all type of solution. Yeah, but let's say from your thesis, I understand that you see the temperature-based modulator as a kind of idle modulator, at least towards an idle modulator. Yeah, let's call it that way.
Yeah. So then my question would be, if you agree that an idle modulator has a very broad application window, how do you see that then for this type of modulation?
Please, a very short answer.
Yeah, yes. Then we arrive at the question, which is more universal, a temperature change or, let's say, solvent composition change? Okay, I think I'm done. Thank you very much for your time and questions and answers.
Thank you very much. We go to the next opponent, who is Professor Verpoorten from the University of Groningen. The floor is yours.
So, dear candidate, first of all, let me add to my colleagues, congratulations on your thesis. Very interesting cover art. We'll discuss at some other point what exactly, or how this exactly relates to the work that is presented inside of the cover. You are a man of helicopter views, I think, when I also see the presentation you just gave us. I'm going to try and drag you into a more detailed discussion of one or the other question. I'm going to start by talking to you a little bit about a statement you make on page 12. You talk here about dispersion mechanisms in HPLC. You talk about the B term, which can be attributed to axial dispersion. And of course, diffusion plays a role in this dispersion. You tell us that diffusion from the middle part of a plug towards the ends of the plug in a separation, and that determines the broadening. You say the contribution is minor at common flow rates since diffusion in liquids is relatively slow compared to the time of an analytical separation. I looked at this and thought diffusion, if you talk about the time of an analytical separation, that's not slow or fast, it's actually short or long. And so how does this comparison with diffusion rate actually work?
Yeah, highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and your question. You raised an interesting point. So the diffusion coefficient for different molecules depends on the viscosity of the liquid. It depends on the hydrodynamic radius or the size of the molecule itself.
Yeah, I know what diffusion depends on, but what is the comparison you're trying to make here?
Yeah, so if we talk about a modern separation that might be a couple of minutes, then if we're analyzing a protein, for example, with a very low diffusion coefficient, then the contribution of the B term to that several minute separation is not significant considering other band broadening effects.
And why is that not so significant? What is it about diffusion that actually makes it not such a major contributor?
It's more about the how fast the band broadening happens due to the B term. And for example, for smaller molecules, the B term is much more of a concern due to their higher diffusion coefficient. If you think about long analysis times for small molecules, then definitely you're going to have a significant contribution of the B term. So it depends on the situation, I would say.
So how fast is diffusion with respect to the actual convection of your or propulsion of your plug through the column?
Of course, molecules move very fast, and depending on the temperature, and but let's say the distance that they cover is, I don't think it's significant. Like I say, in comparison to other band broadening terms. Okay.
I'll take you then, and so this whole idea of relative rates of transport of molecules with respect to transport of eluents in one direction and then eluents in the other direction is a dominating feature in your thesis. I take you to page 57 and that really intriguing figure that I must say I spent a bit of time studying yet again. I studied these sorts of figures several times during the project that we all worked together on. Sorry, it's page 58, I believe. Yeah. Figure 1B. So figure C and D is what you were doing, right? With respect to heating. So you approach the problem in a sort of an inverse kind of way. But you talk about the fact that trapping is generally conventionally done at colder temperatures and elution is done at higher temperatures, right? And you claim in the text, or you say in the text, and I believe you, that in fact 1B, this mechanism, that it works for multiple trap volumes, but it doesn't work for trap volumes which are smaller than the actual volume of the modulator. I guess we should look at this. And I must say, at that point, I kind of lost you. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, so that's a very valid point, because what I try to be very careful about in this work is to compare apples to apples and not apples to oranges. And when we are, especially panel 1B in this figure, it's not really fair towards cold trapping the way that it's done traditionally in literature, because there you take this plug that you're loading that's coming in section A of panel B, and you push it much further into the trapping column using multiple loading volumes. So these triangles and these shapes, they would travel much further into the column. And then once you, in panel E, you elute from the other side, then the green boundary would overtake these shapes and you would transfer your analytes. What we're trying to show in this panel is simply the comparison of one or less than one trap column volume. So, yeah, does that answer your question, Steve?
Not really. I'm looking at the rector to see how much time I have left. Where is our rector?
Well, just,
yes.
Just a few seconds, I'm afraid.
Okay, we will take this up at the lunch you have promised me in your introductory words. All right, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We go to the next opponent, Dr. Smarason from UvA Research. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Dear candidate, yes, I would also like to extend my congratulations with your thesis. I would like to take you back to the introduction and maybe give me a little bit of a helicopter view of one thing. You focus on in-column modulation, and more specifically in-column modulations for 2DLC. Given that there are other established instrumental technologies that provide multidimensional results, what's the point of 2DLC?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and your question, and also for setting me up on this path that I'm striding at the moment. What is the benefit of 2DLC in a greater context of analytics? It is to provide information on highly complex mixtures where one-dimensional chromatography fails to separate, or to provide a tool to separate when the separation is, let's say, very difficult to obtain. So when one-dimensional selectivities are not enough. So I see it sort of as providing the selectivity where one-dimensional fails and providing peak capacity where one-dimensional fails.
Okay. And how does that then compare to, for instance, an LC ion mobility?
That's a highly esteemed opponent. Thank you for your question. That's a very good question. And this is a hot research topic at the moment. I'm reminded of work of my colleague, Baglai, where she touches upon the topic, showing that under some circumstances, ion mobility outperforms second dimension separations, and under certain circumstances, the second dimension outperforms. For me, it's about choosing the right tool for the task. Ion mobility can definitely provide some type of selectivities that a second dimension separation fails to, and the other way around. And ideally, I would, if your goal is to stretch the separation space and the information space to its utmost, then I would suggest to combine the three, because the time scale of the ion mobility measurement, it starts to touch on the time scale of what is, for example, needed as a third dimension separation. Mm-hmm. So for difficult mixtures, I say more information is better.
Okay. Then I would also like to ask you a little bit about chapter 3, I think. with the theoretical aspects. Again, this is a more of a common question than a rather specific one. Given that you have multiple variables that influence the in-column focusing, off the top of my head, we have injection volume, temperature, solvent composition. And I see in that chapter you have a rather classical exploration of the solution space. So that meaning keeping most of the constants, most of the variable constant, and then exploring the variability in one or maybe two of them, which is a good starting point to understand the theory. What about multi-dimensional optimization? Was that explored in your work?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. Indeed, this type of exploration would lend itself very well to multidimensional optimizations. And here we reach sort of a limit of the capabilities of the researcher more than the material, where the researcher likes to explore three-dimensional images visually, and we tried a couple of computations where we looked at a higher dimensionality result space, and it was difficult to interpret. And because we set upon this work with the idea of providing insight into in-column focusing and the mechanisms that govern it, and it definitely did. And I think now, knowing what I know from this, like you say, fixing the variables and just looking at three-dimensional result space, knowing what we got from this work, I definitely think that the next step should be exploring it with a higher dimensionality.
Okay, thank you. That was all from my side. Thanks.
Thank you very much. The discussion will be continued by Professor Jansen from Wageningen University and Research, and he is also appointed at Unilever. Please start the discussion.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your kind introduction. Dear candidate, let me first of all also congratulate you with the completion of your very nice thesis. I think the outside has already been discussed. The cover looks indeed very nice. And it reminds me of all the instruments you are always building. I don't know what it means, but it looks fancy. So I like the thesis very much. In your research, you address a very complex problem, the problem of refocusing, modulation in comprehensive two-dimensional LC. And you indeed discuss a very innovative method, the method of in-column focusing. Temperature is a very important parameter in there, but it's actually not temperature. It seems as if it's more the temperature difference that is relevant. And I would like to take a look with you to chapter number 3, where you indeed describe this influence of temperature difference on refocusing. And I found a very interesting sentence on page number 91. Page number 91, it also relates to the graph that we see, the figure that we see on page 92. Apparently temperature difference is the important sentence, because somewhere on page number 91 I read, the greater the temperature difference, the greater the sample volume that can be loaded on the ICF trap. So it's temperature difference. But that goes against my gut feeling. Temperature difference means that the absolute temperature is not relevant. Can you comment on that? I cannot believe that the absolute temperature is not relevant.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and your question. You raise a question that touches on the heart of in-column focusing, which is actually the slope of the Van 't Hoff plot. And if we assume that the slope of the Van 't Hoff plot is linear, which is, I have to say, quite the assumption to make, then it is about the temperature difference. So because it's linear, it is about the absolute difference. It does not really matter where in the temperature interval you set your temperatures. It's more about the difference in retention and how large that is.
But if I go to a temperature where retention is 0, so if there's absolutely no retention of the compound in the injection solvent, would it then still work?
That would, highly esteemed opponent, that would depend on if there is a retention at the cold temperature and going out. So we show that ideally you would like very, very low retention going into the trap. So high temperatures, low retention. That means that you go all the way to the end of your trap column when you load a single column volume with your analytes. And then depending on how large the retention factor is, once you cool it down and elute in a backflush manner, then you have hopefully large enough retention to retain your analytes so they get swept up into the elution plug.
So that means that absolute temperature is relevant, because if you go to a certain absolute, if you have no retention at the elution temperature, at the cold temperature, no retention at elution at the cold temperature, that doesn't work. So absolute temperature must come into play somewhere.
Highly esteemed opponent, I do believe you're right in the sense that if you go high enough in the temperature interval and you load at 0 retention and you elute at 0 retention of, then in column focusing would not work. But for the example that we show, this would be extremely high temperatures which are limited by the phase system that we're working in. And that's one of the downsides of in-column focusing, that you are limited to the temperature offered by the phase system of the liquid phase.
Yeah, well, it has already been touched upon by previous opponent as well. The other point I would like to discuss is about the maximum volumes that you can load. At another place in chapter number 4, I somewhere read that the maximum volume that you can load should be less than the trap volume. Well, the traps, it says on page 115, sorry, you're right. ICF allows analyte focusing and switching solvents for volumes of 1D element that are smaller than the volume of the trap column. And you describe very small volumes, actually. You speak about half a microliter that you can load. Well, my typical injections in LC are more than half a microliter. So if I just inject half a microliter, why do I need refocusing?
A short answer, please.
Highly esteemed opponent, you're absolutely right. In the chapter where we demonstrate the potential of the prototype, the injection volume is much, much less than you would like it to be. And it was simply because the column offers a lot of band broadening. Band broadening is not taken seriously into consideration in chapter 3. So this volume discrepancy between the actual performed the experiments and the calculation theoretical setting, volume-wise, it's quite significant. But given optimal efficiency, chapter 3 shows the volumes that theoretically could be obtained. But practice is then something different.
No, thank you very much. With that, I hand over back to the chairman.
Thank you. The next opponent is Dr. Mengerink from DSM Material Science. Please.
Yeah, dear candidate, let me also start with congratulations about this finalizing this quite unique piece of work, I think. And I would like to go in some detail with you for chapter 4, where you try to, let's say, prove all your theoretical evaluations from which you had in your mind when the starting of the program, but also try to calculate in chapter 3. So first, let me say, if you have good theoretical ideas, then most of the time it takes a lot of time and years before they're really proven. Einstein is a nice example of that. So there's some things which can be developed here. My first question is in the setup you choose, basically, I think somewhere on page 118. And then you said you choose a column of 100 angstrom, page 119, actually it is. And my question is, why do you choose a column with ports of 1000 angstrom? Can you very shortly tell me why, and why don't you use 100 angstrom, which seems much more appropriate?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and your question, and also for your part in realizing this project and the results there within. So as to your question, if I understand correctly, you're asking about the stationary phase material that was chosen.
And the trap column, I think you used 1000 angstrom pores. Why?
Yeah, so that's the pore volume, pore size of the.
I know what it is. So, but why did you use 1000 and not 100 angstrom? So it's more appropriate for small molecules.
Highly esteemed opponent, you're absolutely correct, and this comes back to the availability of stationary phase that we had.
Okay, so there was not a real reason why you choose. Okay, then my second question is based on that you claim that this instrument has a focusing effect of 1.7 compared to the T0 value. If I look in figure 5 in chapter 4, that is on, let me see which page is it, is page 131. I see that this T0 peak is very broad peak. It already tails from the beginning. And if you then claim, okay, my peak is much more sharper than this peak, I think there's something really wrong with the T0 peak. So my question is, why is this T0 peak has such a, so broad? What's going wrong with the T0 peak?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. The reason for that is the inefficient column that we used in this work. I believe at cold temperatures it offered us 600 plates per meter. So that's for liquid chromatography, that's an abysmal number, and that can be traced to the fact that we were using small molecules on a home packed capillary column. So
and then I come directly to my third question, which maybe I missed it in the text there, but I did not read anything in the text that you actually did test the columns in 1D mode, and then basically before and after the durability test, what you did, but also in both directions. So did you test the column in both directions before and after durability test?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. We did not explore the efficiency of the column in detail before or after. It was more about if it was able to perform the modulation, sort of yes or no type question.
Would it not be very beneficial to have done that? Because now you claim I need a more efficient column, while you didn't even, it's relatively easy to test that. Huh?
Highly esteemed opponent, you're absolutely correct. And if I may go to a previous point that you made in the comparison of the focused peak versus the T0 peak, it's touched very briefly upon in the discussion section that there was also flow delivery issues with the back elution pump, which makes such a comparison dangerous. And in all fairness, I tried to make sure that the flow rate had been established as stable before the two peaks elute to make the comparison of and there's the calculation of the focusing factor fair. We can debate if that detail is appropriate or not, but like I say, it was more about having the in-column focusing performed repeatably and reliably.
Okay. Then to finalize, that is a question which I also had, is especially this about this secondary pump, what you claimed, yeah, maybe it didn't work correctly because of viscosity problems. For me, it is not very clear how you did your experiment. So, for instance, this second pump, did you apply back pressure on the moment that the trap was loading, so that it was not used, so that there is not a huge pressure switch during these kinds of information about how this setup really worked in time, let's say in this 2.3 minutes, I think. Yeah, that's not really clear in the thesis how you did that exactly.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. Excuse me?
Very short answer, please.
Yes, the backwards elution pump was on a restrictor to maintain the pressure while it was offline with the column. And once it was brought online, there was minimal pressure difference between the two, but still apparently it took a while to get up to the correct flow rate.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much.
Okay, the opposition will be continued by Professor Bouwmeester from the University of Amsterdam.
Dear candidate, I would also like to congratulate you with the completion of your thesis. A fantastic piece of work, and as a user of LC separation, I can confirm one of the answers that you gave in response to one of the earlier questions. That indeed, since we are analyzing very complex mixtures of compounds from plants, for example, there is still a need for improving the separation between compounds. But in order for the technology that you've been working on to be effective, it is really important that it is universally applicable. So I want to mostly focus on chapter 3. Yeah, you have developed your modulation methodology with 3 model compounds, and only 3 model compounds, and then you developed a model. And what is not completely clear for me is, did you use the results from your experiments, so the experiments on acetophenone, for example, to parameterize your model? Or is it a purely theoretical model?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and your question. Indeed, let's say we built the model, and the input that we use for the model is real recorded data.
So when you construct a model, and I think that is something, at least in biology, something universal, you construct a model with a certain data set, you use the model, you validate your model with different data. But in this case, I get the impression you make the model with acetophenone, and you test the model for acetophenone. So is that not a self-fulfilling prophecy then?
Highly esteemed opponent, your feeling about this is absolutely correct. We do build the model using one data set, recorded data set, and then we simply show the results of that data set. And that's one of the criticisms that I've received on this chapter, that it does not display the results of the model for more compounds. But then my answer will harken back to what I said earlier, and why we went about this work was to provide insight. And of course, in the chapter we state that this model can be used to predict for actual modulation in reality. That's true, although we don't show it, and I don't have necessarily the results to back it up. But more importantly, we were seeking insight into the mechanism, because we had so many questions regarding the steepness of the Van 't Hoff slope. Should the loading solvent be of higher elution strength than the injection solvent? What would happen when you change the temperature from large absolute values to a small gap? So
this is where I wanted to go, because I appreciate your efforts to try to use your model and the theory to show that or to predict that your method is universal. But you say, well, assuming that molecules are thermostable, do you think that is the case? I mean, if you
highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. This really depends on compound class, and this was one of the let's say difficult things about pursuing the initial proof of concept experiments. It was to find a molecule that was sufficiently retained, sufficiently UV active, and also thermally stable in the temperature range that we use, because for the practical experiments we were going between 130 degrees and 0 degrees, to give an example. And we had to do that due to the, let's say, shallowness of the Van 't Hoff slope, so how the retention factor responds to temperature change. But then you have other types of molecules that have a much steeper Van 't Hoff slope, and then you get away with a smaller temperature interval and hopefully more of those analytes or temperatures stable in that range.
Yeah. So this is exactly where I want to go. So without necessarily completely understanding the underlying physics, I was telling you that I think for the complex mixtures that we are analyzing, indeed better separation methods would be useful. But I also would like to tell you that in these complex mixtures we have large differences in molecular size. And we will have large differences in thermostability. So how are you going to make your technology so robust that it can also be used for these kind of complex mixtures?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. Then I would recommend to pay special attention to the let's say most delicate compounds. What is the temperature gap that we can use while preserving the most temperature sensitive molecules? And let's say if that's 40 degrees, let's say from 0 to 40 degrees, that they're still stable, then the follow-up question becomes, does that provide enough retention factor change between the loading and elutions to make in-column focusing work with a specific volume? Because you can always shrink the volume that you load on the column. So this model could be used for such a prediction. Then we could say, okay, we have this Van 't Hoff slope, we have this temperature gap available. What can be the minimum volume, or let's say actually the maximum volume that we can load on the in-column focusing trap to make sure the analytes are safe and not lose any of them during a modulation cycle?
Okay, I see an additional problem that often we don't know the identity of the molecules, but I give back the word to the chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. The next opponent is Professor Korthaus from the University of Amsterdam.
Thank you, Chairman. The candidates, I'm going to have to do this very quickly. I can see the time, but I'd just like to echo what everyone else has said already and my praise for what's been achieved for you and as a group. I'm going to keep this short, literally because of the time, and I'll just shoot straight to where I want to go, because the last discussion that you just had, as a user of the technology, I'm very intrigued into what the applications are. And so you often use a few molecules to determine the boundary of your system. What I'm looking for is a system that determines the boundary of the complexity that I have as an analytical problem. So human tissues quite often, and we look at proteins. So my question there is very simple. Should we have different modulators for different classes of molecules? We don't have small and large. We have a small variety of amino acids and a large variety of amino acids with very different chemical properties. So how many different modulators do we need to do to study the proteome, for example? Your advice as an expert.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and your question on this topic. I would again advise to take the what is fit for purpose angle. You can get more information by implementing specialized modulators that are have a narrow application range but perform very well, maybe. Such a modulator such as presented in this work. But if we're taking the ease of use angle, and I just want to get as much data in the easiest manner possible.
Can I ask a question? Has anyone done this? Actually used samples such as plants or human tissues, really looked at tens of thousands of molecules?
Highly esteemed opponent, regarding that application area, I'm not a specialist. Regarding 2DLC separations, there are definitely biopharmaceutical applications that are very prominent, let's say in today's field, dealing with, like in the introduction, very complex monoclonal antibodies, and are able to provide detailed information on different characteristics of such complex molecules. But if you talk about a very complex direct sample injection on such a 2DLC system, I don't recall a lot of publications on that type of work. It's more on yeah.
Okay, but then we have another bump on your circle. I'll leave it at that, Chairman. Thank you very much, candidates.
Thank you very much. The next opponent is Dr. Kakano.
Well, I will start, dear candidate, to join the rest of the committee in congratulating you for your thesis. Well, it was an interesting reading and listening material. Can I conclude the question, or there's no more time?
I'm afraid there is no more time for that, but maybe after
then
this.
just congratulations.
At a future time.
Okay, so the discussion is closed now. I request the candidate to read the second part of the form.
Having thus concluded the defense of my thesis to the best of my ability and pending the discussion of the doctorate committee, I should like to express my sincerest thanks to my highly esteemed supervisors, in particular, as well as those who have so courteously brought forward their criticisms, and to all who have honored this ceremony with their presence.
The committee will now retire for deliberations.
Join the breakout room, please.
It's fun. When did you come back? How much time? Don't know. Are we off? No, we're still on. All right, we're still in. Good job.
I think we can still see you.
Look respectable.
Special dance to break it now. We'll take more
Oh, they stopped the video, but the audio still.
And they don't have to go to the separate rooms.
Welcome to the second part of the ceremony. We will continue. Esteemed candidates, after due consideration of the thesis you have submitted, we have decided to grant you the doctoral degree. The supervisor, Professor Schoenmakers, is authorized to confer this dignity upon you in customary fashion. I give the word to Professor Schoenmakers.
I most willingly accept the task assigned to me by the Rector Magnificus of the University. By virtue of the power conferred on us by law, and in accordance with the decision of the Rector and the Doctorate Board of the University of Amsterdam, I hereby confer upon you, Henrik Cornelisson van der Ven, the degree of Doctor, and grant you all the rights pertaining thereto by law or custom. In evidence hereof, you will be presented in due time with the degree certificate signed by the Rector and the supervisors and confirmed with the Great Seal of the University. Having thus fulfilled the task assigned to me, I have the honor of being the first to address you as a doctor and to congratulate you with the dignity conferred on you. So, Henrik, wel edel, zeer geleerde Dr. Cornelisson van der Ven. That's the official way to address you now. And beste Henrik, the beadle has given me 5 minutes. But today, these are Henrik minutes. And many people in the committee know what that means. When we started on the PhD project, the high performance LC project, we found out what we also found out in the last 45 minutes, that Henrik is never shy of words. And when Henrik was due to speak for a few minutes, we figured out what Henrik minutes were, and we came down scientifically to about 20 regular minutes. It's 1 Henrik minute. So when we had been through the first official high performance LC meeting, and it became a disaster that lasted many hours, and everybody was starving by the end of Henrik's presentation, Inge Mengering, who was one of the opponents today, and the project manager, he warned you in advance that for every minute you would go over time, you would have to buy a beer. This is a true story, correct, Henrik? The only slight mistake was that he spelled it not as beer, as in Heineken, but bear, as in Paddington. And so the second official high performance LC meeting, Henrik was showing bears on all his slides and buying himself extra minutes with every slide he was showing. So at the end of my 5 Henrik minutes, I may owe the Beetle 95 bears. This is advanced mathematics. You may ask Andre to make you a model for that. So I've already made up time for about 0.1 Henrik minute. But then you were already a PhD student. So that came after the time that we got to know you as a master student. And we already figured out that you were a very bright communicator and talking all the time. And you also seemed very smart. And you looked very mature, or in another word, old maybe. And there were young kids around you, young PhD students that were not anywhere near as sophisticated as you. Little kids like Bob, yeah. But Bob already has a PhD now. And you seemed among these young kids like some kind of Icelandic Einstein, when you still had more hair than now, or maybe more like the wizard Merlin from King Arthur's legendary stories. But sure enough, you had a very positive effect on these people around you, because these little master students around you now already have their PhD. And same in the high performance project, you were kind of the experienced analytical chemist joining. Yeah, you had experience, we had experience with you. And we got 2 young girls from the Ukraine joining you. Yeah, and they didn't know much analytical chemistry when they started. But by now they have long gotten their PhD also. So they were a bit faster in the end. And if you look at it, I think Anna and Margarita, I tend to refer to Anna as Anna, you call her Baklai, it's the same person. But I think they did their work in gradient elution mode. That means that they started slowly, and then towards the end they got faster and faster, and they eluted as a nice, sharp thesis by the end of their time. And I think Henrik's work, your work is a bit more the isocratic mode. It's gradually progressing at the same speed without this incredible spurt at the end. And it must be isocratic mode, because otherwise I cannot explain the dispersity between the different words in the thesis. So it's that's probably scientific, slightly explanation for that. But it's clear you have an incredible influence on the people around you. When you came from Iceland to Holland, one of the national sports in Iceland is handball. I guess it's too cold to do anything outdoor. And you became some team's handball coach. And because in Holland, nobody knew anything about handball. But now that you lived here for a number of years, now the Dutch women are world champions on handball, and we're taking over the world. So that's the kind of influence Henrik has. And now that you're at a free university, I guess Raya behind you probably gets a Nobel Prize in 5 years, because that is the kind of effect you have on the people around you. But you haven't quite reached those stellar heights yourself. You do describe your thesis around the ideal modulator. I'm the one that forced you to put the word towards in there, so as not to claim that it's already there, but you have a feeling like, yeah, but this is the ideal modulator. But it is a bit like Professor Peters was describing it. It's like most of the time it wasn't working, so it was actually an idle modulator. And so it's not quite perfect and robust yet. And also you say like, yeah, my column did not perform quite so well. I think you can say that honestly, because You're the only chromatographer I know that has fewer plates in his column than I have in my cupboard. So it's not quite ideal in every single respect. You do have memorable achievements, though. I cannot resist to. You brought it up yourself. You started talking about the coronavirus, and in those terms, it's good to commemorate that you introduced social distancing for analyte molecules a long time ago by having one single analyte with unique molecules dispersed over all four corners of the chromatogram, which is quite remarkable. And in engineering at that time also mentioned it was a Guinness World Record to do so. So that's the social distancing aspect. There's other things that connect you to modern times, because for many years before the coronavirus outbreak, you were looking as if all the barber shops were closed. So that's all gone. The wild hairs are gone. But there are some more connects than you made in your original layman's speech. But over the years, we got to know that social is a word that fits you better than distancing. And whenever anything social was happening, whether it was a free lunch or a free dinner or free drinks, Henrik was always the first one to show up. So we're going to miss some of that today. We were all hoping to get back to you on this one particular day, and somebody has stopped us from doing that. You've been a paranym many times, and finally we can actually see you really in the middle. It has taken a bit of time. It also has taken some effort. I don't quite remember, I couldn't figure it out how many versions, how many chapters I have read and spelled out, but I have the impression that your co-promoter has done even more of them, and he really has put in a lot of effort. But there's more. Your other paranym I know has helped you with some chapters. Dr. Gargano, who still has to tell people what his question was, he helped you with chapters. So you got some help, but in the end you wrote it yourself. The only thing is that we were trying to figure out what exactly you had been writing. But we see your talent. Your talent is in talking, in teaching, in explaining. You kept the audience, if we were students. I never get to hear these layman speeches, but this is one of the achievements now on doing this electronically, that I actually got to hear you. And it's like everybody is like, oh, how is he ever going to bring this to the modulator? So everybody is listening to the end and to listen to your final 10 seconds or 10 Henrik seconds in which you finally get to the point. But we couldn't always do this in answering your questions. You know, like I said, at the Free University, and you're trying to get a bit younger or feel a bit younger because you're now a junior teacher. I think the Free University can benefit from you in that role, but we are CASA in Amsterdam, all the analytical science community, and the very many students we have. I think we can all really benefit from your talents in teaching, in explaining and communicating. And I wish you a lot of success in that position, but also in your personal life. I congratulate you and your family, and I finally thank everybody who contributed to the defense for making it work. Thank you very much. Congratulations. Enjoy the day and the rest of your career. Having said that, we have to get to one important bit, which is that you must regard the obtained dignity as an honor and a privilege, and you must never forget the attendant responsibilities which you now bear towards science and society.
Thank you. It is a very pleasant duty, most learned scholar, to congratulate you, also on behalf of the doctoral board of the University of Amsterdam, with this newly acquired honor. And I hereby declare this ceremony closed.
Okay, now's the time to congratulate the candidate.